Hey, I'm Jim Brown, animator at ILM. Today we're going to be doing a walkthrough of my animation, Winds of Victory. What I want you to take away from this lecture is that acting drives every decision you make, from character development, to staging, to cameras, to posing, to facial animation, and to that final pass. Winds of Victory was inspired by my love of football. Wrong football. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's get started. So here's what I'll be animating today.
On these Winds of Victory ride emotions of a year, of work and sweat, guts, glory, and fear.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go, and give me all 3 of my timeouts, and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Let me hear the roar of the crowd. Let me have them booing on one side. Let me get in and call plays, see the eyes grow as I call these plays, and talk to them. Let me feel the hair on my back crawl up. I mean, that's what the Super Bowl does to you.
All sights are set on one glittering goal: the chance to play and win in the Super Bowl. On these Winds of Victory ride emotions of a year, of work and sweat, guts, glory, and fear.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go, and give me all 3 of my timeouts, and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Let me hear the roar of the crowd. Let me have them booing on one side. Let me get in and call plays, see the eyes grow as I call these plays, and talk to them. Let me feel the hair on my back crawl up. I mean, that's what the Super Bowl does to you.
All sights are set on one glittering goal: the chance to play and win in the Super Bowl.
The inspiration of this animation really came from my love of football. I was listening to an NFL film CD, and I came across Terry Bradshaw talking about the Super Bowl, and his passion was so intense that it gave me goosebumps. I was just so excited by how intense he was about, the situation he was in the Super Bowl, and how exciting it was. And it gives me goosebumps every time I listen to it. I mean, I got so fired up, and then I realized that I could take this and animate it. This was something that I really, really, really wanted to animate and combine my love for football with animation. And also the fact that I loved it so much, it made me realize that this was the perfect audio clip for me to animate, because I knew I was going to be listening to it about 1,000 times. When animating this shot, I had to ask myself, who is this character? Now, I know it's Terry Bradshaw, quarterback of the Steelers, Super Bowl winning quarterback, but I'm not going to be animating Terry Bradshaw. I'm going to be animating this character in this shot. So how do I take that and make it into something that's my own? What I really thought about is, okay, he's a quarterback. He loves the game. He's obviously out of the game because he's reminiscing. His passion is so insane, and you can feel the tension in his voice. It's unbelievable. And he really loves the game. He loves it more than life itself almost. He's just so passionate about it that it's another love of his. It's almost like a religion. So then I thought about how I relate to the character, and how I've had moments in my life where I can sit and reflect about great moments that gave me a similar rush. To find an interesting take on the character, what I'll do is try to think about what element outside of his situation can I bring to it. What else can you bring to this to add depth and more to who this character is? And what really hit for me was when I realized that football is like a religion to a lot of people in the United States. And since it's like a religion, I really started thinking about evangelical preachers and how they reach out to the crowd and they really want to get in there, and they inspire people so much with their words that I kind of wanted to get some of that element into this character of, he's basically like moments where he reaches out and almost grabs the heart of who he's talking to and pulls them into him, and really gets into it. And so it's finding that element outside of the current realm that he's in and adding that to add depth to that character. Now that I've discovered who this character is, I'll go in and shoot a lot of video reference and try different things that really kind of help me solidify how this character is going to act.
Glory and fear.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go, and give me all 3 of my timeouts, and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Let me hear the roar of the crowd. Let me have them booing on one side. Let me get in the
Once I've got a good solid take that I really like in video reference, what I'll do is sit down with paper and pen and go the old school way and do a lot of thumbnails and basically get across the main points of the acting, similar to a comic book or whatnot, that just basically hits the main points of the story that I'm trying to tell. Once I have my video reference and my thumbnails done, I'll go back and review them and look for anything that stands out as cliche. To me, what cliche is something that you see a lot, or something that's very over-the-top deliberate. It's like a point, or if you were to say two, and you said two, that can be considered very cliche. Now, you may look at the Winds of Victory animation and say, but then that means that's full of cliche. I mean, he's pointing when he's saying that, he's doing 2 minutes to go. But the way I looked at it was, since I was coming at this from an evangelical preacher angle, I wanted to get some of that excessive deliberateness, if that's even a word, in there that says, like preachers do, they point when they're trying to get their idea across, and when they say two, they point two, because they want it to be excessively clear to their audience what they're trying to say. So a similar thing with a coach or a player on a football field, when you're trying to describe something, you'll use hand gestures that mimic almost exactly what you're doing to really get your point across. So when you really think about what the actions are, it removes them from the realm of cliche and makes them more true to your character. Now with the character figured out, I needed to figure out a way to present him in order to, show the audience exactly what I wanted them to see. When watching a lot of NFL films in my time and watching the Sunday morning interviews pre-game, I got really excited to use that kind of aesthetic in my animation, along with some, football films like Any Given Sunday, or, the Unnecessary Roughness, where they take some real live action stuff and put your camera in there. So I was going for that kind of aesthetic. And what I did was just to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do cuts? How am I going to figure this out? I really just listened to the dialogue, and I listened to it over and over. And like I said, probably more than 1,000 times. I really got in there, and as I listened to it, I started to hear how the camera was supposed to go. Starts off with the announcer and how he's talking about the situation, the big setup, talking about the Super Bowl and all that. And so I wanted to do like an encompassing kind of an establishing shot that showed our character just sitting kind of alone, ready to be interviewed, ready to reminisce in the middle of the field, kind of on the sideline, because he's no longer in the game. So he's on a bench, maybe. That's what I was thinking. And then make sure he's off the field and just kind of flashing back. So dark and very focused on him. So I did this establishing shot where you kind of just see him sitting there and thinking. And then that really helped me with the announcer time to come up with that. And then once he starts talking, I wanted to get a little more intimate, but not too intimate, almost like an interview process where someone films, directly from the side and says, and you don't quite see the interviewer. So kind of a side view, him talking, so you can really see the gestures in a solid silhouette. And not so much worried about some of the face, but even, tilt the head a little to the camera so you can kind of start to see those expressions building. And then as he's talking, I wanted, just to feel like your Sunday morning interview. But then if you really listen to the dialogue, there comes a moment where he starts to reflect. And he even starts to think like he's in the game, or talk like he's in the game. And he's almost in it, and you can hear it in the dialogue. So that to me said, hey, let's change the camera. Let's put him in the game.
Hear my name over the loudspeaker. Let me hear the roar of the crowd. Let me have the booing on one side. Let me get in the call plays, see the eyes grow as I call these plays.
The closing shot then takes you from the internal of this character to the external, back to the interview of the sequence, just to kind of bookend the whole thing and wrap it up nicely. Winds of Victory really gave me an opportunity to focus on simplicity. Since I was going to take this single character and put him in kind of an isolated environment, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible so I could really focus on his love of the game. And that's what I wanted the audience to focus on, and not like crowds and other players and all that stuff. I wanted it to be him and his emotion. So what I did was just figured, what are the main things that are going to allow me to keep it simple? Green ground, a couple stripes, and a bench, and one light just on top of him. Let's make him just the center focus. Let's keep it simple and cut out anything that is going to detract from that. And it was very similar with the camera moves and the gestures and those things. I want him to really emphasize the situation and the simplicity of it all. Simplicity focuses the audience's eye, so I really wanted to emphasize that so the audience would look exactly where I wanted them to look. I wanted to make sure I remembered the goals of my shot, which are to express his love for the game and make sure that the audience is only focusing on him. I tried to stick to realistic camera moves, nothing too flashy or out of the ordinary, things that wouldn't detract from the overall character. To start blocking, what I will do is break out my thumbnails and really look at them and look at the storytelling poses that I have thumbnailed out and start putting those poses into the computer. What I'll do is generally start by having my character in what I would call a default pose for this shot, which is basically like the main pose he's going to start in or something like that, which here in this case, I have him, slumped over. He's just starting to really think about what he's about to say. So one for me that I liked the most as far as a storytelling pose was when he reaches out and says, put me at the 1 foot line. And he's doing kind of a reach talking about, 1 foot line and how close, he is to his own goal line. I don't have the bench in there currently because I don't want that getting in the way or any props. I really want to just focus on his pose. One of the main things you really want to think about in posing on a character is how does this represent what he's thinking? So in this situation, I really want him leaning into the action, leaning into the interviewer who, like we talked about, is off stage, and really figure out, what does this pose say about how the character's feeling. So you want to start with and think about what's driving what in this. Generally, how's he going to get to that position? How's he going to reach out? Is he going to, lead with his head? What's driving the action? In this case, I really want to show that he's kind of a weighty guy. So a lot of his action is going to be driven from his hips and his torso. So he's going to lean in with his back. So I want to make sure to start by posing out my character in his spine. Trying to get movement in his core is really important. And what I mean by movement and how to get movement in a pose is to really just suggest movement by making sure you really feel the pose. Don't hesitate to take your pose too far so it looks, it almost looks silly and broken, because that's how you know when something is right. It looks right. You start to feel it's right. If you're not sure, take your character and take them beyond what looks right and take it till it's too far, and then it'll let you set up a boundary for, okay, that's too far, and then you take it to the other extreme and you say, okay, that's not enough, and then you kind of start dividing in half, and slowly you at least find the pose that you're looking for. In this point in the animation, our character is just starting to get the attention of the interviewer. And so what I went for was him to kind of reach out, tap the interviewer and say, hey, this is what's good. This is what I'm trying to tell you here. It's like that kind of that old man is like, hey, son, listen to me here. And that's what I'm going for with this pose. So you really feel him leaning out there, and maybe his eyes are going to be big. Maybe he's going to lean in and look out of the corner of his eye, but really get his attention and lean out and start telling him what he's about to talk about. Another important storytelling pose in this shot is later when he says 2 minutes. Make sure you get that emphasis of him leaning, because it's almost like a demand. Give me 2 minutes. He's like telling him what he wants. So you really want to feel like he's in there. Again, he's leaning forward. He's trying to get close to who he's talking to. So you want to get in there, and again, you start. I like to start personally with my shot default pose in this situation. And don't forget things like twist, anything you can think of that's really going to help emphasize the action and emphasize the acting that really helps tell the story. Something I'll think about while I'm posing is I'll really try to focus on keeping the attitude of the preacher, of the evangelical preacher, and make sure that, does it really have that feeling that he's trying to basically grab his audience, and make sure, okay, is this feeling the way I want it to? Does it really suggest that dramatic approach, the deliberateness of what the preacher's trying to say? And generally what I'll do is, hands for the most part, I won't get into too much, but I will try to get something that helps me tell the story. It's just like with the posing the body. Does this hand pose help me suggest too? Does it tell the story of what I'm trying to accomplish? And the answer right now is no. So what I can do then is just go in enough to give me the pose that I want in the hand as well as the body. So with storytelling poses, what I'll do is I'll flush out enough to get me there to tell the story. So like with the hand, I have to put the hand in there, and as with all your poses, you don't really want to get married to them. This pose may work right now for what you're doing, but as you work, they're going to evolve a bit into stronger poses, because that's just what happens when you work. You start to see things and go, well, I could take that a little bit farther, or I could take that down a little bit. And in this pose, when you're blocking your storytelling poses out, you really want to get in there and say, okay, this story is a graphical representation of what I'm trying to say. How's my silhouette? How are the fundamentals of posing? Is his weight in the right place? And those are the things you want to think about, and then you want to start thinking, okay, now, is this preacher enough for me? Does it feel like he's really leaning in and trying to reach for his audience, or does it feel like he's just too laid back? At this point in the shot is where the character goes from external, talking to the audience or the interviewer and talking more about what's happening, to more of an internal point where he starts to reflect more and kind of go into his own head, and more like he's talking to himself at this point and reliving this. And his last point is, and give me my boys, and he's pointing at the guy like he's demanding his boys, and then he's going to go into kind of a relaxed pose up into what would then be him reflecting. And generally when people reflect, they'll tend to look up and off into the distance. So what I was going for in this situation was pretty much that pose of him looking up and going off in the distance. But since the next shot, the camera's behind him, I wanted to lead the audience's eye that that's where we were going. So I had him turn a little bit extra and look more behind him in a way so he could face the camera a little bit and then help the audience, lead the audience's eye that direction. Now, the last pose we have is this one. One thing that for me I find very useful is if you select all your keyable attributes and then you basically just copy and paste them to the next frame, you can just pose right out of that frame. The point here is to then use that pose as a jumping off point to get you to the next one, so you're working fluidly through that without losing some of the action in the process. Now in this pose, since we're going to want him to sit up, I definitely want to lead with a lower back. I want to start working there because that is what's going to drive the entire action. All the while I'm looking at my thumbnails, because to me my thumbnails represent the poses that I want to get. And it gives me a solid guide to work from. Now my pose isn't going to look exactly like my thumbnails, but my hope is that it has the same feel of my thumbnails. So what I'll do is just, make some changes here in the spine, see how this thing's going. In this situation, he goes from kind of up and everything's kind of tense and even his point is tight to a more relaxed state as he's thinking about the past and getting back into his moments in sports. Working with your clavicles will help, really solidify the pose and help you with your arms and giving it that attitude that you're looking for in this shot. Remember also that the eyes are the window to the soul, so to speak, right? So you really want to make sure that they're in the position to help sell where the character is looking, because that's going to help dictate what he's feeling. Is he looking out of the top of his eyes? Is he looking at the bottom of his eyes? So head angle is very important in your posing to really keep the attitude of your character. Sometimes on the stage I will block in eye direction, but when I'm really focusing now on the storytelling poses, what I'll do is focus primarily on the body pose, because the posture is what's going to sell it from this point. Eventually the eyes are going to be that nice icing on the cake. So I can get to them later when I've done some more posing in there and really helped lay that in. Because right now I just want to work on the body attitude. All the while checking how it looks in the camera view and making sure that everything's starting to read as a almost kind of semi-relaxed state of, does he feel like he's reflecting? Does it look like he's thinking back into the past? Don't forget your perspective view, because you want to make sure that your attitude works through the body. How else can you get a little bit more angle on something, a little extra twist to help it feel a little bit more grounded in reality? All right, let's take a look at a movie file of all my storytelling poses laid in. As you can see, the timing is really off and it's very floaty and all over the place, but I'm not too worried about that. What I'm concerned about is I want to make sure that the character is generally hitting his marks in a roundabout area and that those poses are actually there and reading. I mean, you can see the reaching. It feels like he's reaching out to his interviewer, like he's like kind of gently touching him to get his attention. But then he slowly amps up his demands of, 2 minutes. And as you can see with like this pose, you can see like the fluid line that runs through his body. So I'm still considering my silhouette as well as, body mechanics like my weight, where my weight is, but I'm making sure that it's really addressing the idea of him reaching out to who he's talking to and trying to get a hold of him. And he's just doing his main gestures. And then at this point where he goes from his point, or his last solid point of giving my boys his demand, into his internal reflection. So he goes from external to internal here as he leans up and reflects. And you'll notice a camera move at the end there, and that's something that was necessary to put in to keep him in frame, because the camera moved because it had to, not because it was just something to do. I moved because it had a reason to move, because I wanted to get him up high enough so he could sit up and kind of pull himself away from the interviewer and get more internal into his own mind. But I wanted you to be able to see that. So a slight camera tilt up, very soft, and a little bit behind the character. If you'll notice that on this, the character breaks frame, his eyes do, and then the camera corrects. Generally, if you're following someone with a camera weighs a good amount of weight, so the camera doesn't follow him exactly. It's like, oh, there he goes, and you kind of follow behind him a little bit. It's a natural lag that allows for the camera motion to feel more real, and in essence, people will notice it less, because I don't want people to notice the camera. I want them to notice that this character is starting to reflect. He's really sitting up and thinking back to those times where he was actually in that position. Now that I have my storytelling poses blocked in, I will go in and start blocking in things like anticipation and extremes. In this situation here, where he's got his 2 fingers out and he's going to go into a big swipe, right before this big swipe, you would think, well, you don't really need an anticipation through here, right? He's just going to go right into it. But he's been holding this pose for a while now. He's been sitting there. Anytime you're sitting in a hold for a bit, you need to anticipate your next move, not only to tell the audience that you're going to do something now, but also it's generally how we move as people. You need to create some sort of motion to have motion. So the best thing you can do for anticipation is to move down, because that's how your body builds up force. What you do is when your body moves down, your muscles contract, and it helps them build up strength to then push the object the other way. Because to just go straight from a still pose to an up pose is very difficult. And it also, if you animate it that way, it feels off. So in order to get a good anticipation to go from here to here, one thing you can do is start to go down. And you say, how do you go down? Well, what you can do is set a key somewhere in the middle. You kind of count off in your head, well, an anticipation should generally take, I don't know, for this action, pick a number out of the sky, 5. So we'll count off 5 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and set a key. What I do there then is I go back and forth between this and say, okay, that doesn't look like it's leading into the action. So what I'll do is I'll copy this key here that we're on into my anticipation frame and set a key there so it's the same frame, so it's almost like a hold. And I want to go into this pose. And you're thinking, well, how are you going to anticipate into that pose? One thing I'll do is I'll do a little, dip down with the body, go down with it. So if you'll notice, he goes down and then into this. Now he's going to continue to kind of lead that direction. But let's look at it from a perspective point of view. See how his body's shifting over? We want to tell the audience that we're going to do that. So we're going to want to counter this just a little bit to go the opposite direction to give it a little bit of a oomph to get started. Like I said, it's going to build up energy so it can go that direction. And maybe as this area starts to move, you might want to counter with something else, because you think about it, you really need to start thinking about motion within your poses. And anticipation pose is a great pose to really get motion within your poses. And what that means is you want to feel like body parts aren't all moving at the same time. It's kind of like getting a natural overlap in your poses. And if you'll notice, I'm starting with the lower spine because that's what's driving the action. So what I'll do is I'll drop him down, but then I may counter up with like his upper spine a little bit, just so you really feel the spine start to bend. And you notice how now you feel a difference. It's not all moving at the same time. So the lower spine is definitely leading the action in this. You can feel the lower spine starting to go, whereas the upper spine is kind of countering that, and the head and neck are almost in the same position. And here you can just drop the arm down and start to bring it a little bit its direction it's going to go. And as you flip through these, you just go use your next key button back and forth. You start to see the action taking place. And you start to see him anticipate. Well, let's say, okay, that's not anticipating enough for me. Maybe I want to do, the wrist out and rotate it a little bit. By all means, give it a try. See how it feels. That to me doesn't feel like he's anticipating as much as it did before, so I might go back and put this kind of back where it was, right? And maybe, the shoulders might counter as well, because he's supposed to be leaning on this shoulder here, where his forearm's going across his leg. And what that's going to do is you're going to start to see that even though the spine's going down, that shoulder's going up because of that pressure being put on through there. So there's a lot to think about in anticipation pose. But as you start to work them out and figure out, okay, how is this going to lead into the next action, you'll start to see it. And if you really think about, the body mechanics of silhouette and weight and where everything's going, it'll really start to solve those problems for you. Maybe you want to make it bigger, get a real big anticipation pose. Crank the head. Because the spine's going down, the head can go up. We can make it ridiculously obscene. Right? That's like a very cartoony take. But for this situation, I want it to be more subtle, so I may go back to that hand pose that I had. Just undoing here. There we go. Undo. Set your undos to unlimited because you'll need them. I know I do just about every day. Use about 1,000 undos for any given pose. And if you'll notice now, like the head and neck are moving at the same time, so something I'll do is like counter the head, so maybe it just doesn't feel like it's moving all at the same time. And you'll start to see how this kind of anticipates the action that's going to take place. After I've laid in all my anticipations, which is basically any time my characters come to a complete stop, what I'll do then is I'll use an anticipation to tell the audience my character's going to start moving again. After I've laid all those in, I'll go in and start putting in the extremes. And what extremes are, anytime you go to a pose and you want to hit that pose really hard, because in an acting sense you really want to emphasize that pose and show that the character's really forceful with it. And if he goes in soft, it may not be the attitude, at least with this character, that we're trying to get. So I want to hit some poses and go past it and come back. And that's what an extreme is. It's taking that pose and pushing it beyond where it's supposed to go, and then bringing it back into your regular pose. And the way I accomplish an extreme pose is very similar to the way I accomplish an anticipation pose. What I'll do is I'll go to a pose I want, like him saying 2, and what I want him to do is really hit that for emphasis. But when he hits that, he has to go past it. So what I'll do is I'll go from his big pose up to his big pose down, but I want to find that extreme pose in there. And by doing that, what I'll do is similar to what I did with anticipations, take that frame and back up a, say, 5 frames to give me some time and count them off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then copy that pose to that frame. What that does is it allows me to work with that frame, and I can kind of flip back and forth and find out how far I've pushed past my pose. So what I'll do then is take this hand and really start just pushing it. Really want to take it and see how far I can go before I break it. As I flip through the poses, what I'll do then is look at how the extreme is reading. Right now, obviously, it looks broken because it's just his arm. So, okay, well, that's one thing. Well, that means I need to get his back into this, right? And if I really want to hit this, maybe I bring the back down some. See how he then kind of settles back into his storytelling pose, and really kind of twist him up and think, how can I get that arm to not be so straight? And that means I need to get his body a little closer, maybe counter a little bit with his head. But all the while, I got to be thinking, okay, is this still within my character? Does this still read as, our preacher? Is our preacher man going to get this crazy? Yes, it looks like he might. Right, but the arm's too straight. Again, so what's one of the problems? Well, I got to look in at the shoulders. Because again, the clavicles, the shoulders really sell a lot of your posing and your attitude. It's so much. It's like the eyebrows of the body, if you will. They're great how they kind of hit in there, and it really helps sell that. Now, personally, I feel like this is too much of a point right here. I feel like it's less emphasis on the number 2, and it's more of an emphasis, it feels like a point. So I kind of want to back off the rotation on that and really sell it like it's almost like the hand angle barely changes, so it's more flat to camera, so you really read that it's a 2, because that's a very deliberate point I want to hit with this character. So as you see the extremes, you start to feel as you flip back and forth, okay, he's starting to feel like he's really doing it. How his back kind of cushions in and his head comes up. All the while, like I said, you're thinking about overlap. You're thinking about what's leading the action. And like most of your posing and most of your action and acting, it's going to come from the lower spine and the hips. I mean, he's sitting, so we're not driving the hips around too much, but the lower back is really going to drive a lot of his action. Once you get, a solid pose that you like and you're feeling like, okay, that's a pretty good extreme, then you go through and do that for any time you're hitting a pose really hard. Once you have your extremes in there and your anticipation and your storytelling poses, you basically have a solid blocking pass. So let's take a look and see what that blocking pass looks like.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
Now that all the poses are laid in, what I'll do is go in and make a movie of that file and check the timing. Make sure that the actions are taking place on the proper phrase or whatever I want to do. Do I want to hit it on the word, or do I want to hit it right before, after? And how does that relate to my character? Is my character moving too fast for his attitude, or is he moving too slow? And these are the types of things I'm looking for. Does the timing reflect the attitude that I'm going for with this character? So as we look at it, we can play it through and kind of look for those things. Is it too literal on hitting the 2 on the 2? And do I want to make it a little less deliberate there, where maybe he's a little bit behind? Let's take a look and see what it looks like.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
So as you can see, he is hitting a little bit too much on 2, and then that move is just really fast. And you're missing some of the action when he says, and give me my boys. It's just really fast right there. He sits up so fast. That's something that I'll go in and shift some timings, which we'll show you in a second. And then you'll notice how he sits up really fast and kind of locks off. His sit up might be a little fast. Maybe I want his reflection to kind of he kind of starts fast but slows out until it slows up as he gets to the top. These are the types of things I'm looking at and seeing, okay, that's some area I need to focus.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
And even watching, you'll notice maybe he holds 2 minutes to go a little bit too long. He holds that 2 out there, and then this moves awfully fast too. Some things to think about. So what I'll do then is go into my scene file, select all my controls, and if you notice in my graph editor, there are a lot of keys in here, and this is kind of the section that we're working on. What I'll do is you'll notice everything is keyed on the same frame. I haven't offset anything yet. I haven't done anything that would take this into the realm of offsets or anything like that. What I've done is just kept it very simple and clear and easy to edit, because that's the key. You want to make it easy to edit, so that way it's easier to shift timings and you're not worried about saving that cool motion that you have in there or anything like that. So what I'll do is I'll go, okay, well, this big move here before the point was really fast. So what you want to do is go to the beginning of the move, which is right here, and you notice it was fast between these two, right? So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames, and we want to make that longer. And if it's fast, just, I'll take a guess at it and say it feels fast by 4 frames. So where am I going to find 4 frames? Well, if you look before the action takes place, you'll notice there's a long hold there. And I can probably take a couple frames from there. So I'll go to the beginning of the action, select those, and then I'll hit Shift and my middle mouse button, and I'll shift it a couple frames. And if you're having trouble getting it to the exact frame number we want, say you want 2 frames, say you want less, a little tip is you can go over here and you can say, plus equals 2, and you'll notice that the keys shift exactly 2 frames. So if you're going for a specific number, you can also say minus equals 2, and then that'll give you your 2 frames there. And then say I said I originally wanted 4, and 4 was just the right number, so I need to find another 2 frames, but I don't want to take it all out of this hold because I really like this hold that I had in here between, this and this. Even though it's a little drifty right now, I like the amount of time that's there. So what I'll do is go, okay, well, where can I steal a couple frames after that action? And there's a long hold in between here, so maybe I can take a frame or 2 out of that hold. And again, if I want to do a frame, just take exactly 2 frames, plus equals 2. And there, bam, it shifts that exactly 2 frames for me. And then again, I've got 4 frames total in this section here where he rises up before he points. And that'll really help that situation and not feel so fast. Once I've made those adjustments, what I'll do is kind of scrub through here and check it with the dialogue to see if it still kind of hits around the same frames and if it's still reading right. And you say, give me my boys, right through here. So he's still firing on boys, which is pretty good to me. It's around that same area. So I'll go through the whole shot and go through my notes and make sure I've hit all my timing fixes that I've wanted to make. And then I'll make a movie file, and that's what we're going to watch right now.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
With the timing's into a place that I find I'm pretty happy with at this point, I'll go in and I'll do what's called breakdowns. With this guy, I really want to drive with the hips because he's such a athlete and kind of nailed down to this bench. I really want to make sure that he's driving with his back and then really getting his shoulders into it. And this is where you actually start animating. You've done your poses, your timings, and now you really start getting in there and making sure that the movement's starting to be the way you want it to be. So in this action, you'll notice that this is the part where he's going to do a big swipe all the way across his body. So you're going to want to find that pose that's right in between those 2 poses. All right, so let's turn a little bit so we can see how big that real swipe is. So what I'll do is I'll select all my controls. And then I'll go between the 2 frames. Now generally, when I say you put the breakdown pose in the middle of the 2 poses, that doesn't mean that if it's 4 frames, you put it 2 frames in the middle. It means you're putting this pose somewhere in the middle, but generally you want to favor one side. Do you want to slow out of your first pose, or do you want to slow into your last pose? So you have to know kind of how you want the action to take place. So one way to do that is you count how many frames are between them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In this case, it's an even number. But I really want to favor the first pose, and I want to hit hard on the second pose. So that means I'm going to want more frames towards the first pose. So what I'll do is I'll go about 2 frames in and copy that pose 2 frames later and key it. Now what you'll notice now is that as I flip between these 2 poses, you'll notice that the hand's going completely through the neck, that's a result of IK, which that's also what we're going to fix. But you'll notice that this middle pose favors the first pose and doesn't favor as much the second pose. So what that's going to do is it's going to slow out of that and speed into the next pose. What I'm talking about here is spacing and not changing the timings. The timings are staying the same. It's still 6 frames apart. It's just how fast is the character getting across those 6 frames, and where is he during those 6 frames? And that's what spacing is. So you'll notice that he's not moving evenly across. His spacing isn't even. His frames are going to be slower towards the beginning and then fast towards the end. And that's the difference in spacing and timing, because it's still going to take 6 frames to get there. So that's basically kind of what breaking it down is. It's looking at your spacing, it's correcting it, and fixing it. So you're going to ask, how do we do this? Well, what we do is I jump in and just start pulling some things around. Get in there, and I know the arm is going to need to be out here somewhere, because I really want this action to read. And you'll notice already you can see the arc starting to happen just by moving that arm out from under his neck. Another thing you'll notice is see how much the spine favors the first pose? So if I go from first pose to breakdown pose, you'll notice how close it is. And then from breakdown pose to final pose, you'll notice the bigger spacing. And what that's doing is allowing that slow out. And then what I'll do is go in and I'll really use the graph editor to help me out in this situation. By selecting his lower spine and zooming in on that area, you can even isolate a specific rotate. And in this situation, since he's going so drastically in rotating in Z, I can look specifically at a Z rotate and zoom in on that. And you'll notice here, the highlighted key is our breakdown key. And see how it's pretty much right in the middle distance-wise between the first pose and the last pose. But there's 4 frames between the first pose and the breakdown, and there's 2 frames between the breakdown pose and the last pose. So bringing it closer to the last pose, you notice how the line gets really almost perfect 45-degree angle? Well, that means your spacing is going to be really flat. But see how it has a nice arc to it? That means that the spacing is going to favor the first pose. So what I can do in here is adjust it to something that feels a little bit more natural. And then what I'll do is just continue to do that on a lot of the body parts as I roll through. And I'll continue through this and continue to flip after I've made some adjustments to see how the action's taking place. Now if you notice, the back is staying pretty flat. And say I want a little bit of arc in the back. So I'll go to this pose and give it a little dip. Give the neck a little counter. And see how it gives it a little bit more of an arc? And it kind of has them pop up a little bit at the end. These are the types of things that when you add them in, really add character to your movement. And it's things like this that really add that, who that character is back into your animation. So no longer is he just floating pose to pose, he's moving more deliberately. He's leading with his hips. He's driving his shoulder across, you know. Like here, see how much the shoulder's lagging? Let me select this shoulder controller. And if I lead more with the shoulder, you'll see how that will start to drive out a little bit in this pose. And it really helps. It gets the shoulder out there. Another thing that's a good action to help lead the arm is lead with the elbow. You know, get that elbow out there more. Maybe even rotate the hand a bit. So now you'll see that the elbow is really leading the action. But at the same time, you want to go back into your camera view and go, how's my silhouette? I mean, these are things you're constantly thinking about. Silhouette, acting, does this work? And notice how right through here his arm is getting very foreshortened, and we're kind of losing the action. We're losing what's happening. Pulling it out, maybe rotating it a bit to get it back into shape so we can really see this hand swipe, something that reads a little better. There you go. So you can actually start to see the action taking place and those types of things. And what I'll do is I'll go through and find, you know, all my poses that I've put in there and start breaking down and finding that middle pose between each of them and doing that breakdown pose by flipping this. However, in certain situations, and this action is a very good example of this, your poses that you've already set and worked out sometimes can be a little bit big. Because if you really look at this, I mean, to have this action take place over 6 frames, it might be kind of fast. And so let's say it overall it feels a little fast to you. Don't hesitate to not change your timings necessarily, but change your initial posing so it's not quite as severe. Right? So all of a sudden the spacing gets less, so the move becomes a little slower. It makes it a little bit more realistic. So maybe his arm flying out here is a little bit too far. Maybe it's too extreme for you or for me. So all of a sudden it's a little bit less. Now it still has the same attitude, the same action. Your timings are the same, but it just doesn't have to happen as fast. You know? So one thing I'm looking at are like points like the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist. And if you'll notice here, his elbow's kind of shooting all over again, so then I just go back to, you know, my elbow and make some adjustments so it feels a little bit better. Maybe I want a little bit more lag in the head. So see how I'm getting a lot of overlap in these poses without even offsetting a key. All my keys are still on the same frame for every control. To summarize, with breakdowns, you just want to be looking for your arcs, spacing, getting your acting in there and in your overlaps, and really that's where animation starts. That's where you're really starting to get in there and make the motion look fluid and look like your character's moving because he's moving. But remember, when you're in there, don't hesitate to change your storytelling poses and your key poses in there. Feel free, if it's going to make the emotion and the acting read better, to change those as well. Those are just guides, and you want to make sure that that action is going to work across that breakdown. So let's take a look at the breakdown pass.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
The next step is getting in there in the graph editor and cleaning up some of your curves and taking out some of the little hitches and odd things where your curves kind of overshooting and eliminating some of that drifting animation that's still left in it. At my work, we call that temp. And that's where you go in and you just really start cleaning things up. The body's getting close to final. You're really kind of laying in a lot of the cool stuff and adding those real nice slow ins and slow outs, as well as, fixing any bulging overshoots or really flat cushions. And I'll explain all that here in a minute. And then just, you feel like you know what you're doing and you try to get in there and fix it. But again, you don't want to be married to it. And if something's not working, this is a really good time to go in there and make it work as well. What I'm going to do here is go in and check out what's going on with this last hold. What I'm looking for in his reflection pose is him to kind of drift up into it and almost like he's slowly kind of just seeping into that reflection. And what's happening now in the pose is he's hitting it and stopping completely. And what that's going to do is immediately kill the life of the character when he completely stops. And so instead I want it to just kind of soften. And that's what jumping into the graph editor is going to do. It's going to allow me to really focus on getting that to soften or get a real nice slow in. One thing you want to focus on heavily is the spine, because the spine is really dictating the action of the body. Since so much of the action is driven from the abdominal area, as he sits up, he's leading with his back. And if that comes to a lock, everything else above it is going to come to a lock. So you want to make that soft, and not necessarily soft, but that kind of slow in and slowly set into its pose. And then everything else you can kind of manipulate on top of that. So what you're going to want to do is really go into this area here and select your spine and then check out its graph editor. So once I've selected the spine and I'm going to look at the graph editor, I really want to focus on the main rotation of that joint. And basically, if you look at this, he's going to be sitting up. In that case, it's the X rotation. So I'm going to select the X and really take a look at that a little bit more close up. As you can see here, the spline completely flattens out in this hold. And that's not necessarily what we want. We want it to soften in a little bit, but not continue to constantly move, so it's a slight adjustment. One way to go about that is to select your keys that you're on that starts the hold and the breakdown pose that you used to have here. That one, and select them both and shift them slightly up. And if you'll notice, now there's a slight difference if you really look at this in this window here. There should be a slight difference there. It's a very minute difference for this pose. So maybe that's not enough. So let's go in and give it a little bit more and see if that helps. Now you can see that there's still a little bit of action happening in that spine. Now I may want that to hit a little bit sooner, and the problem now is it's going to be continually moving, which will add a drift, and that's not necessarily something I want. So instead I may grab the original start key of the pose, pull that back down a little bit. Come on, there we go. And maybe adjust this curve here by flattening it out. And what that's going to do is it's going to get there, but it's never going to quite completely flatten out. And if you'll notice, it still moves very, very subtly. Even if it's just a pixel, what it's going to do is keep that a little bit alive. Then what I'll do on top of that is start to go in and work my way up the spine. I'll go to the next one and find my X rotate. And really look at that and say, okay, here, it's a little too flat again. So let's loosen it up. Let's bring it down. Just so it has a little drift in it as well. And if you look up here, you'll really start to see there's still a little bit of movement in there. Now, the problem where you're going to start running into is if you do this with all of them, everything's going to have the exact same slow in. So just like we did with the breakdowns and the other poses, you want to find movement within these corrections, within these adjustments. Some of it may be timing, and this is where offsets can come into play. So things like the neck and the head, maybe you come in and give them a little bit of a shift in offset by a frame or two, so they don't quite get to their position until later. And if you'll notice now that the head and neck keep moving a little bit longer, but again, their rotates are awfully flat because that's something we don't want. So the reason I'm offsetting some of the extremities like the neck and head, and in this case you don't need to do it with the arms, but in a situation where you may have the arms be getting there, the reason you offset it is so that everything's not getting to the same pose at the exact same time. So that way the back's getting there first, and then then maybe the upper chest, and then the neck and head. So what that's doing is emphasizing the overlap and giving it more of a soft approach to getting to that pose. Because the problem is when everything hits at the same time, then it again starts to feel like it's animated and not like it's living. You're going to want to make sure to check as you're cleaning that you're not affecting your acting choices. You don't want to go in and have this really overlapping settle into this long drawn out pose if that's what you don't need. In an action where you're overshooting or something like that, you don't want to overshoot and have the hand continually drift. You want to go, is this positively affecting my acting choices? There is such a thing as cleaning up your curves too much, like going in and making your curves too pretty. Like just because your curves look good doesn't mean that your animation is going to be perfect. So you always want to go back and check out run a play blast and check your work to make sure that it's still keeping the ideas that you were trying to get across. And that's the point, is to make it look right, because if it looks right, it is right. Just because you have good-looking curves does not necessarily mean you're going to have good-looking animation. So you always want to double-check what you're doing. With temp completed, and you've got everything in the body working fairly well, and your actions are feeling pretty good, and you're really reading the acting in your motion, you got to now start focusing on the face, kind of like the icing on your cake, because your cake's pretty well built. And you put the icing on there and just make it sweet. And the first thing you really want to get across is kind of like how the jaw is going to work. Kind of a jaw flap, if you will. Just you don't want to worry about too much about expression or any of that. You really want to start just getting the jaw in there to get kind of a feel for how the pacing of the shot's going to go with his attitude and kind of how he moves his jaw, and just to kind of get something in there to help you build on. One of the first things that I like to do when I'm starting to work on the dialogue and the jaw flap is to chart out the audio. Generally, a lot of times, I'll chart some of the basic stuff out in the beginning to help me establish my timings for my blocking poses. But this charting out is more involved with more details of exact sounds and phonemes and things that are going to help me express emotion and ideas in my acting within the face. I'll go through and literally just write down on a dialogue chart, or sometimes if I don't have a chart available, you can use a blank piece of paper and just write down the numbers, the frame numbers that go along with the corresponding sounds. I've developed sort of a shorthand to know what sounds are, because if you just write the letter E, well, that could be eh, it could be E, it could be I. You don't know what it is, so I'll do some phonetic stuff, like for the letter I, or if I want the sound I, I'll actually write out E-Y-E, so that way when I read it, it's phonetically sounded out on the page. So I can go in and go, oh, I want to say, give me 2 minutes. And if I want that, I don't have the, GI VE written down. I have GI and then like an IH, like give me 2 minutes, because you're not really hearing the V in there. So the charting, you really have to listen to it, do some scrubbing in your Maya, and really break down and listen to the sounds of what's being said, and not necessarily the word that's being said, but the sounds that are being said. Another tool is to draw like basically mini thumbnails of mouth shapes near those phonetic sounds that you've written down. So just little reminders of shapes that might help. For this character, I really wanted him to kind of talk out of the side of his mouth, to really emphasize that country style, to really get that feeling of like this guy's been around and he doesn't really talk, with the perfect, he's never had orthodontic work, so to speak. So I really wanted to draw some of those ideas out and how to hit those shapes and how to pull that corner down and how that might work. So I'll leave little notes for myself, or if I want to hold a shape and just flick the tongue on like a TH sound or an L sound, I'll draw that down, and those are really good tools. My last tool is what I like to call the Muppet hand, because I grew up on the Muppets. But if you give dialogue and you use your hand to do it, you really get a good sense of how the jaw is actually going to work. The thing about your hand is it moves about as fast as your jaw, so you can't overdo it. So if you ever have a section where you're like, I don't know how fast to really move this whole thing, so I'll look at my hand and I'll go, give me 2 minutes. And I go, okay, that's how fast. And it hits a little tighter on the gimme, right? So it's got a little move on gimme. And that really helps me see how fast something's actually moving. And that kind of helps me look at it so I'm not overemphasizing every sound. Let's take a look at a movie with just the jaw flap.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
Once I've got a solid pass of the jaw flap, I'll tend to go in and lay in what I like to call an expression pass. And what that is not focusing on every expression and hitting every beat. It's focusing on the broad spectrum of emotion that this character is going through, and primarily focusing on the eyes and the brows to really sell their thought process. While listening to it, though, you don't really want to hit like little twitches or that kind of stuff. You're really just it's almost like a blocking pass for the brows and the eyes. And what you want to do is go in and really lay down like the thoughts and what are the clear thoughts for each piece that you want to hit. In this situation, when you hit something, you don't want to be every time I hit a word, I change my expression. Generally, people hit an expression and hold it until they want to make a new point, and then they'll try a different expression for a bit, and then usually end in some sort of neutral pose sometimes. Sometimes they'll end in an angry pose. Whatever their last emotion is, that's kind of where they're going to hold at the very end. So in watching our character here, you can kind of see what some of the expressions would be. He's very serious and intense. And what I'll do a lot of times is use a mirror and really look in the mirror up close and figure out, hey, what kind of expression am I getting? Do I want to get the brows down, or do I want more of an arcing brow? And how is that going to help the character? Not to mention, how is it going to draw the audience's eye? If you look at this pose here in the expression, you'll notice how the brow rises up towards the person he's talking to. What this does is it opens the character's face up, and it directs the audience's eye to kind of look away from him and to where he's looking. It's like that line kind of leads it. And at the same time, it's kind of a quizzical brow. More quizzical, kind of serious, like opening your eyes. My grandfather used to do this one all the time, kind of opening one eye wider than the other to make it seem like, are you listening? Are you paying attention? Kind of a pose. And so what I'll do is I'll go through and really basically block out the brow shapes here. So he starts off where he's kind of got the furrowed brow as he comes up, and then he'll raise a brow and he'll sit there a little bit like he's just starting to get into it, And his character is a little sly, so he's always got one eyebrow that's a little bit higher than the other. And that really, for me, helps sell this character and give him that attitude that I want of that kind of, that coach, that preacher. And as he goes in, as he starts to open his eyes wider when he really wants to accentuate a point, 2 minutes is very important. Because in football, you have in professional football, you have the 2 minute warning, and that gives you like that if you can score in that amount of time from your own 1 yard line, well, that's a heck of a drive. That's an amazing feat. And so he wants to emphasize that he only has 2 minutes to go because it puts the pressure on him. And then so really get in there and show the attitude of that. And then think as he's thinking again, and then he's like, give me all my timeouts. And that's a little bit more of a casual expression. Give me all my timeouts. And you want to hit those kind of moments. And you'll notice as I'm just flicking through the poses here, there's not a lot of action happening. They're basically just hitting a pose and going to it, because that's pretty much what our brows do in real life. But here he gets serious. He says, give me my boys, because that's something he has to have. He's got to have his boys. He can't do this on his own. So that's why I got that really serious kind of like furrowed brow. The one's a lot lower than the other. But then as you see as he goes into a reflection pose where he's really thinking, then that one eyebrow goes up and his eyelids actually come a little bit more relaxed as he kind of looks up. And you'll notice how the brows at the very end here lead your eye off into the upper corner because of the way the brows are shaped. And what that does with his eye line really shows the audience that we're going to start going that direction, which sets up the next shot behind it, which we know is the one that's low and comes up from behind him. The expression pass is basically just to get in there and lay in the overall ideas you want to hit, and say the little twitches and the cool little nuances for the final pass on the face. And now we're going to look at that expression pass, and you can see what I'm talking about.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
Once I have my expressions laid in, and it's reading well with the character, and it's feeling like those are the expressions I really want him to hit, I'll go in and not only adjust the lip sync and start working on the face, but really focus on how the lips and mouth affect the face around it. Because even though we've broken things out and said, okay, move your jaw now, move your brows and eyelids now, we all know that this thing we call our face is just all one giant piece that works. It has a lot of little moving parts, but all works together. So if I were to do, this side, you'll notice this cheek pushes up into this lid, which this lid eclipses that eye a bit, and I can't see if I leave my brow down, so I got to raise the brow up a little bit, to get that right expression. And you'll notice how things work together in that, like, if I raise this eyebrow and I talk out of this side of my mouth, you'll see how this side scrunches up and this side may get bigger. And it really creates sort of a line of action for the face. And those are the things you really want to start looking at in this face pass here, this final face pass of when you're laying in the actual lip sync and really getting it to work with the jaw. And you've got your jaw flat, but now you're going to want to start doing some jaw twisting, so he talks more out of the front of his mouth maybe, or really start pushing your expressions and getting that sort of element into your animation. And looking at the actual scene, you can see now how like the face and then the corner of the mouth starts to go up. You see the cheek being affected, which is pushing up on the eye. And this is exactly what I was talking about in that sense. And in this part of my process, a lot of times what I'll end up doing is basically going in and looking at my charts, looking at where the sound is hitting, and go in and start animating almost straight ahead. Because I've got my blocking in of my jaw, I've got my brow expression in there, and now I kind of just start almost straight ahead animating, which gives it this very spontaneous kind of feel, because that's kind of what your face does. When you have a thought, all of a sudden something kicks on, like your brow goes up or the corner of your mouth kicks. And what I'll start to do is start going in there and really start hitting my shapes on these sounds that I've charted out, but I'll do it almost from point A to point B and not necessarily jump around. And then once I've got those laid in, I'll go in and start tweaking that and start pushing up on the cheek a little bit and getting it more to all work together. And you always want to keep in mind, is this my character? With this character here, our preacher Coachman, he's just like, he's country, He's got the jaw out, he's got the corner of the mouth back, he's got really hard expressions. That's who my character is. And I just want to make sure that he's continuing to hit those types of things. You can see here in the scene, I've already pulled the jaw forward. He's got that lip out and that one eye, both his eyes are closed because he's feeling the emotion, That's the kind of thing you really want to get in there. give me my boys, or 2 minutes. And over here when he talks about his boys, notice how his jaw drops out and down. Right there. Those are the little things you start to want to get in there. This is where you start getting the life in the face, the character, the acting. You want to get in there and get that little extra jaw push to get it out there to really sell that he's kind of that country coach. And as you start to do this, this is some of the most rewarding part, and you start to feel your character come to life. Now let's take a look at that final Face Pass movie.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
In this last pass, something you're really going to want to do is just forget the graph editor, forget all that technical stuff, and just get in there and make this look sweet. Look for things like odd pops or intersections or something like that that's causing there's something to draw the audience's eye away from what you're really trying to get them to focus on, which is your character. If you're watching it and something's not reading right, this is the time to fix it. You really want to get in there and make it just add that little extra touch. Maybe it's an extra little hand flick. Maybe he rubs his fingers at some point. Something that you haven't thought of that you suddenly thought of, like a little bit of a decoration on that cake we've been talking about you're building, Adding that little extra, maybe you close that eye a little bit more because it'll really emphasize that. As we scrub through the Maya file here, just kind of going through and really looking, what can really help. Can I push this overlap here on this wrist as he's driving his hands forward? Can I get in there and maybe give it a little bit more oomph to really have that drag a bit more, because that's going to help sell his character. What is it at this point? What are the things that are going to drive? One of the things is right in here where he brings the little finger touch right in there. It's getting a little bit of a overlap. If you look on this hand right here, this little extra movement, this little extra cherry, as he brings his hand up, he no longer just brings it up and rests it. He does a little bit of like he's tapping someone on the shoulder, like we talked about earlier. The preacher coach who's trying to get your attention, the older guy who's trying to tell you a story. That thing. You get in there and really add just that little bit of a tap right there. Those are the kind of things that I'm talking about in adding life, adding those true moments that you see from other people. It's things that maybe you haven't thought about to this point, but you have a great idea to emphasize it. This is the time, this is the place to really get in there and add those bits that's really going to sell your character and send him home. Another spot in the animation where you can look to add some life is if you watch the follow-through on this wrist here, just getting that to really sell with the character. This is just a guy he's hit his moment where he's relaxed. He's going into his relaxed phase, and this is the beginning to sell that. You're showing that he's getting relaxed before his whole body actually get there. His mind is already there, thinking ahead. So he hits his arm, and his arm does this little kind of relaxed motion there, a little, settle on his leg. And you'll notice as it comes down through here, how it kind of overshoots and recorrects and just settles in there because gravity takes over as it's just hanging. And this is the point right as he's going from externally talking to the interviewer and internally reflecting on really what's going to happen. And so it's really showing that crossover. It's helping emphasize that crossover of that moment. As you see him looking up, and you can see he's getting relaxed as he's thinking about the times of past. Another nice little final touch, which really, these types of things really sell to the audience. They won't necessarily see it, but they'll feel it, and they'll go, something about that was really kind of lifelike. And it's these moments, like if you watch his other hand, as he sits up, you'll see this little pressure happen as he puts weight on that hand, and as he pushes his body up, and then the pressure kind of releases a little bit as his body starts to take over and his spine takes over that motion. You'll see a little relaxing on that hand as well. And it's that kind of pressure that's really going to make it lifelike and add that nice touch that's really going to nail it down for the audience and make that character believable. In this final pass, this is where you're really going to kind of sweeten the deal, really bring out that coach preacher, and you really want to sell that, and you really want to watch the animation a number of times and try to find that that moment you can add to really sweeten it a bit more, add that little extra decoration on that cake, and go in, and if something's not working, again, still don't be married to it. Feel free, even though it's your final pass, feel free to make some changes. You'll be amazed at how much changes from your original blocking pass to your final pass and what it's really going to look like, because your goal here is just to make it as sweet as possible and really sell that character to your audience so they believe that he's this old player who just is really trying to get in their soul and tell them how amazing football really is. And that's what you're trying to accomplish with this whole thing. Let's take a look at that final animation pass.
Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker. Put me on the 1 foot line and give me 2 minutes to go and give me all 3 of my timeouts and give me my boys. And then let me hear my name over the loudspeaker.
I hope this lecture today showed you the importance of acting in animation. Some of the key points we hit on were staging, character development, poses, and adding life. These are all points where you really want to push your acting in there, because your acting is going to help you make the proper decisions in animation, in posing, in getting the right attitude, in putting in the camera in the right spot to really help you sell what you're trying to get across to the audience. And when you take all those elements and you constantly remind yourself, what is my character thinking? What is he trying to get across? That's when you're going to have the right answers, no matter what your answers are. So keep that in mind next time you're in front of the computer and you're stumped and stuck. Get in there and think, what is my character thinking? What is he acting? And how can I make it work for this stage that I'm in? So in the end, what you want to do is remember one thing. You're animating. And it's a great thing to do. And these are some great key points to think about when you're working, and I really hope they help. But remember to have fun and really put your heart into it and really focus on what am I trying to accomplish. And in the end, as long as you stay true to yourself, your animation is going to be great. Thanks for watching.